Thanks for sticking around for this. This is a good idea that we do this after the worship service, right? You don't have to drag yourselves out on a Saturday afternoon. Dan, if you could just take me down a couple notches there. Okay. All right. Yeah, could you still turn me down though? Okay, thank you. So we're going to continue our conversation about worldview today. So this is kind of a big picture view, and I just kind of want to help us think through some important issues when it comes to Christianity and how we think about things. So that's what we're going to do. You may stop and ask questions at any time you like. There is going to be no PowerPoint for this. This is old school, so it's not because I don't have PowerPoint. I feel like I'm rebelling if I don't use it, and as a Gen Xer, that's how I'm supposed to feel, right? We were the rebellious slackers. So, but I will give you everything slowly and clearly. I do highly recommend if you can take notes. That's great. I'm constitutionally incapable of making a handout or fill in the blank kind of thing, so you don't get one. I can't do that. I think as I think about people, I think there are two kinds of nerds. I classify nerds in two different ways. So the first kind of nerd, strawberry and grape, I never thought of that before, and it took me a hot second to even figure out what that meant, but no. So we're not talking candy. So the first kind of nerd would be represented by some guys in the church that I pastored. I pastored in the inner city of Scranton for a while, and we would be having a men's Bible study night, and I'd get there early one time, and I walked in, and I saw these guys, and I could tell by their body language that they were in deep discussion about something, and I thought, oh, yes, finally, right? The women's Bible study, they dove right in. We didn't have to, encourage them, and they dove right in, but the guy's like, I don't want to do this, and I kind of get it. But I walked in, and I could tell they were deep in conversation. I thought, oh, my goodness, what are they talking about? You know, how God truly loves us, how we're free from, no. They were having a debate, a discussion, on if there was any substance in this universe, or any other, that could withstand the penetrating and slashing power of a lightsaber. Now, this is pre-Mandalorian, all right? This is years ago. We weren't really sure what Beskar was back then. We had just faint guesses from the Star Wars movies, and they were serious about it. And I thought, oh, for Pete's sake. And that stuff kind of interests me, but I really thought we could probably use our time a little bit better. And so I made a suggestion. Guys, I can clear this up for you. They're not real. That didn't help. That didn't help at all. They were kind of angry with me that I would even suggest such a horrible thing. So that's one kind of nerd. Those kinds of nerds also really understand the intricacies of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and DC Comics, and they would never confuse Star Trek and Star Wars. Never, right? You don't do that. In fact, unless you're J.J. Abrams, you don't even say those two things in the same breath. And if you get that joke, guess what? You're a nerd. You understand what that means. So that's one kind. I'm a type 2 nerd. Type 2 nerds, we can kind of appreciate that kind of stuff, but type 2 nerds, we're the kind of people that we go to movies and we see the worldview, and we understand what the writer, director, producer, or actor is trying to tell us about reality, and we get really excited. And we're sitting there in the theater, and we kind of ruin movies for you, not because we tell you the end, although I do have a habit of that, which I'm trying to break, but we kind of get excited about things that you don't maybe see. We get agitated, and if you're sitting there in a movie theater, Andy, what's the problem? Did you hear that guy's name? It just locks everything together. It shows us what they're trying to tell us about the movie. Dude, the guy's name is Gary. Like, what's the deal? It's that kind of stuff. I was talking to somebody before worship service this morning, there have been times I've gone to the movies by myself, not expecting to have anything interest me, but I've seen movies that are just dealing with some worldview issue, and I want to talk to somebody about it so bad. That happened a few years ago when I went to see Interstellar. I wasn't prepared for the spiritual, theological aspect of that film. I should have known better, being a Christopher Nolan film, but things like that. And occasionally, those worlds clash. And so as a type 2 nerd, I appreciate going to our local big box bookstore. All we have is a Books A Million. That's the only bookstore in the county in which I live, which is kind of sad. But that's where I go, and I hang out because type 2 nerds like books. They like ideas. We like the world of ideas. Type 1 nerds can as well. And I remember I was in our Books A Million, and I was in the fiction section, and I was checking some stuff out, and I happened to notice these two guys kind of coming out of the anime, graphic novel, comic books section, and they really looked out of place in a bookstore. And it was kind of like, in my sanctified imagination, they were treating it more like a zoo than a place that you go make a purchase, kind of like, let's go see what the goofy people who actually go to bookstores actually do. Like, they just escaped from their mom's basement, having conquered Assassin's Creed 29 or whatever the most recent iteration of that. Again, for you Gen Xers in the room, my first thought was Beavis and Butthead when I saw them. So that was my first thought. If you don't know who I'm talking about, that's okay. So I watched them, and they come over to a large display of a particular book, and I'm within easy earshot, and I can hear the one guy talking to his buddy, and he picks up a book, and he's flipping through it, and he's pointing to the signage that's hanging from the ceiling, and he says, I can never understand why they don't put this section in that section. Now, the large display of books that he was looking at were NIV study Bibles. In fact, that very same NIV study Bible, it wouldn't surprise me if some of you have that same copy and use it. And he was pointing at the sign that said the religion section, and he said, I can never understand why they don't put the religion section in the fiction section. That's what he was saying. And there would have been a day, had I chosen to engage them at all, I would have been very angry. And the only thing I would have been able to say to them would be something really, really great, like, nuh-uh, or something like that. Or, how dare you, do you not understand, have you offended the heart of a holy God? Which, the fact of the matter is, if they don't know Jesus, they cannot offend God any more than they already have, right? So we had a discussion about the historicity of the Bible and how that all fits. But it was simply a matter of worldview. How they were thinking about reality, and I don't know what the final outcome of my conversation was with them. I know I planted some seeds. I don't know about the soil. I had no follow-up with them. But there's this idea that every person on the planet, you, me, everybody on the planet, we see reality through a certain set of lenses. There's nothing that happens, there's no data that you receive as raw data. You filter it through something, through a particular set of lenses. So what we're going to do is we're going to explore what those lenses look like, and we're going to talk about some different aspects of worldview, and we'll see where this goes. So let me give you a definition of what a worldview is. So this is where the note-taking will begin in earnest. Let me give you a definition of worldview, and I'll make sure I go slow enough for you. A set of presuppositions which we hold about the basic makeup of our world. A set of presuppositions that we hold about the basic makeup of our world. I'll give that to you one more time. a set of presuppositions that we hold about the basic makeup of our world. All right. So that seems simple enough, and it is, right? It's a set of presuppositions that we hold about the basic makeup of our world. So let's talk through some of the ideas that are embedded, and they're not hidden in that idea. What's another word for presupposition? What? Assumption. Good. Anybody else? Bias? Who said bias? Okay. So a bias, or plural biases, that's a word that has come under attack recently, right? We are told by our culture that we should be bias-free. Is that possible? No. Do you know what the word bias literally means? Anybody know? It's actually a culinary term. No, but that's good. On the angle, right? So I put myself, my wife and I both worked at a hotel, restaurant, resort in Clark Summit. Before I started working for the college, they helped us put us through school, and so sometimes I'd have to follow a recipe, and so I was kind of the sous chef. That's a simple term for I'm chopping a lot of stuff that the real chef gets to use. And I'm reading the recipe as now cut the scallions on the bias. What do you mean cut the scallions on the bias? And the chef is like, it just means angle, dummy. Oh, okay. So it's an angle, right? So it's we got biases, we got assumptions. What was another word? Somebody else said a third thing. No? Okay. Well, is there any other word that we could use in there? Presuppositions? Opinion? Yep. Belief? Right? All these words can fit in there. Okay, so let's talk about if a worldview are a set of presuppositions which we hold about the basic makeup of our world, and we can use the word belief, assumption, bias, all those kinds of things. That means that those biases, assumptions, belief are basic ways we're leaning or angled, biased, towards a certain view of reality, right? So each of you present here right now had a basic leaning or belief that we were going to have the seminar this afternoon. How do I know that you believe that? You're here. Very powerful act of deduction on my part, but you are here, right? You believing we are having church today, as we use in our common language, and you prepared yourself and you drove to church because you had no reason to believe otherwise, right? The weather, albeit cold, and did you have fake spring here recently? I know. How cruel. Yeah, we did too. I can't believe how cold it was the past couple days. But you know it's not snowing. There's no ice on the roads. You did not get an email from Pastor Steve or anybody else telling you that there is, things are canceled today, and you know that nobody's in the habit of lying to you or tricking you into showing up here when there's nothing going on. That doesn't go well, right? So you acted then on your belief that you were having church today, right? So do you see where presupposition is beliefs? Now, these presuppositions which we hold about the basic makeup of our world, the word hold, in the idea of holding, there's some things that we also need to talk about. Because these presuppositions we can hold in a couple different ways. We can hold them subconsciously, so I doubt anyone here, nor anyone who was here an hour ago, woke up this morning and said, now I need to consider the metaphysical reality as if we are really having church today. It's just Sunday. You get up, you do your thing, you have your fight in the minivan, and then you're all smiles when you walk in the door. What are you laughing at? Did that happen today? Right? You don't really think about it, nor really should you, right? But there are certain beliefs that we actually hold and act on subconsciously, and probably they should be held consciously to actually think about them. So I will tell you what I tell my students, because I walked them through a talk very similar to this in my Intro to Philosophy class. As Christians, and I'm going to make an assumption, you're at the seminar, I'm going to make an assumption that most people, my bias is that most of us in this room, if not all of us, are indeed born again, or children of God. You should think about your worldview consciously, and not just assume, well, I was raised a certain way, I was handed an idea, it seems to work, well, that's great, and you actually could be right, but that doesn't mean that you're consciously holding that worldview, which could then lead to issues later on. So these presuppositions, assumptions, biases, beliefs, opinions can be held subconsciously. I suggest to you they should be held consciously. They can also be held or acted upon consistently or inconsistently. To be honest, to be intellectually honest, probably a good number of us, despite our best efforts, act inconsistently within our worldview. Do you think that's a fair statement? Okay, I'm not trying to trick you or be judgmental or sound mean, but I am wearing a vest and a tie, so I think that gives me a right to speak academically. But the fact of the matter is we probably do. And what does the Bible call that? Sin, right? When you know to do a right thing and you don't do it, or approach that however you want, right? So it's inconsistent. Now, is every inconsistency within a worldview sinful? No. But if you're holding the presuppositions consciously and you're attempting, your goal is consistency, okay, this is good. Now, let's go back to the idea of presuppositions or assumptions. So, again, my silly and simple illustration, yet it's one I think we can all readily wrap our minds around. The assumption that we were doing something meeting here today. Okay, you happen to be right about that assumption, correct? Could you have been wrong? Sure. Now, it's going to take a suspension of belief to come up with a scenario, as to how we're not going to have church day. Gas main leak and the whole building goes up in a cloud of smoke. I don't know. That would be a good reason to cancel things today. In this building, at least, right? But you could be wrong. The assumptions and beliefs that we have, you could be wrong. So the question then for a Christian within a worldview is, well, how do I think through these assumptions, beliefs, presuppositions that I have? Because if they are indeed true, I must act on them, right? Because if you never act on a belief, there's something that you do not have. Would anybody like to hazard a guess as to what that might be? Faith, right? You can say you believe in Santa Claus all you want, but if you go shopping on Black Friday, you don't have faith in Santa Claus. Do you go shopping on Black Friday? Do you put out cookies and milk on December 24th? I tend to put out cookies and milk on July 3rd for Captain America, but that's me. He's yet to consume them. So you can believe it, but you really aren't acting on it, right? Your belief, so beliefs, assumptions, opinions, presuppositions are cheap. Why? Everyone has them. Everyone has them. Everyone has these biases or assumptions through which they're viewing reality. Or the easiest word picture I can give you, the lenses through which we see reality. Now, my optometrist tells me that these lenses correct my vision. I can see 20/20 with these glasses on. I cannot without them. Your worldview, or any person's worldview, is not necessarily corrective. There are different ways of looking at reality. So we would be intellectually dishonest if we were to say that Christianity is the only way. Meaning, there's no other way to see reality? Of course there's other ways to see reality. And we're going to talk about some of those. I'm not saying they're right. That's not what I'm saying at all. And nor am I saying it's just a matter of what you believe, because that's also not true. But it is a matter of asking, is this the right way of looking at things? All right, so a worldview is a set of presuppositions that we use to understand the basic makeup of our world. Presuppositions can be true, partially true, or entirely false. And the way we hold them could be consciously, subconsciously, consistently, or inconsistently. So again, I'm suggesting to you that we hold them as consciously and as consistently as possible. All right. So a worldview is not merely just beliefs. It actually answers a set of questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through 9 fundamental questions that a worldview answers. 9. Under these 9 questions, everything fits. Now, there's different ways of coming up with the fundamental. If you're a more science-minded person, if you want to think elemental, same idea. There's other ways of organizing these questions. It doesn't have to be these particular 9. I've seen it reduced to 4 before, but I like these 9 because I do think it gets to the heart of things. And in order for any worldview, including Christianity, including the way you see reality, has to be 3 things. Before we even get to the 9 questions, has to be 3 things. And they are, number 1, they all start with C. So I don't alliterate often, but I did do a lot of my education at a Baptist institution, so sometimes I just can't help myself. So number 1, it needs to be comprehensive. Your worldview must be comprehensive in that it must answer all the questions. That's a bit of a no-brainer. Or as one of my professors in grad school would say, no minder, because you don't actually think with your brain, you think with your mind. But that's also part of a worldview. So it doesn't take much to figure that out. Yeah, of course. So if there's 9 fundamental questions, would my worldview need to answer all of them? Yes. And that's really not hard. In fact, a worldview can answer these questions and can do so really subconsciously. You don't have to think about that. Just kind of rattle off the answers to things without thinking about them. Well, they are answers, and maybe actually you get some of them right just purely by guessing. But that doesn't mean that you've really answered the questions consciously. Subconsciously, you hold on to an idea, but you haven't answered consciously. So the first idea is that it needs to be comprehensive. Number 2, and these get harder as we're moving down the outline. Number 2, they need to be consistent. And I will give you an example. I'll give you examples of consistency, actually inconsistency, as we get into this. So what I mean by consistent is that B follows A, B follows A, follows C, D, that everything lines up, right? So there's a way to answer these questions that if you could have great discrepancies amongst these things. I'm going to show you once we get to the 9 fundamental questions, and you're going to see how there could be something awry. So again, we're starting with they have to be comprehensive. We answer all of them. They have to be consistent, and the third one is really hard. And I'm not setting up a joke. I'm serious about this. The third one is called correspondence. Now, that's not a word that most of us would use in our daily lexicon, yet it is one that you're probably not unfamiliar with. Back in the dark ages, when my wife, Becky, and I were dating, we didn't have email or any type of instant message. We actually wrote correspondence on paper. Do you ancient folk remember that? Putting stuff in envelopes with a stamp, mailing it? Yes. Yeah, we used to write letters to one another. So a correspondence shows a relationship between things or ideas. So if a worldview needs to be, it needs to be comprehensive, consistent, and correspondent to what? Reality. Or asking the question, and you can only ask this consciously. You can't consider this subconsciously. That's just illogical. But you're asking consciously then, is this the way things really are? This is not easy. This is hard work. Now, could you, or could anybody who identifies as a Christian say, I don't need to worry about that, God said it, I believe it, that's good enough for me? Can you do that? All right. And assuming Christianity is true, if they believe the Bible, they have confessed their sins to God, asked Him to save them, are they going to heaven? Even though their intellectual pursuit of Christianity is the equivalent of drop kick me Jesus through the goalposts of heaven. Right? Will they be there? Yes. Well, that's good, but it's also dangerous, because could they not easily be swayed? And that's not answering a question for somebody who's a skeptic. Well, you believe X, Y, and Z, and I understand you believe them consistently, and I appreciate that. But how do you know they're true? Well, because I just believe it. Well, that's not answering the question of correspondence, because again, is Christianity the only worldview that's available to people? No. So, before we get into the 9 fundamental questions, it would be worth us to stop just for a second. Let me just give you an opportunity. Do you have any questions, comments, or snide remarks at this point? Snide remarks? Do I have this conversation with them? Yes. I tone down they know I'm a Christian, and they know I'm coming at it from a Christian perspective, but I dial that back just a little bit. Any other questions?
What do you say about
consistency? The question is, what did I say about consistency? So consistency is going to show you, once we get to the 9 questions, that the answer to one is going to agree with the answers to the others, right? I don't think I said that clearly before, so thank you for asking that question. Okay? They all line up, right? And so the importance there, let me back up and dive into that a little bit there. It's kind of just a complete no-brainer that we have to answer all the questions, but it's also common sense that when someone says they believe something, you expect them to believe it consistently. Anybody with children, multiple children, who have gotten in trouble, you know how to conduct an interrogation, right? We've all seen Law and Order enough times. You know how to conduct an interrogation. So my children are a year and 2 days apart. There have been times when they have conspired to do naughty things, and I have to, the first thing I do is separate them, right? Because, oh, go ahead, go get your story straight, and then we'll talk. Like, I know enough. We're going to separate them, and I am bad cop. I have no problem with that job. And then I ask them very simply, what happened? So what am I listening for? Consistencies or inconsistencies. Are they telling me the same basic story? Are they telling me the same story with the same words? That is suspect. So if Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John told you the exact same thing with the exact same verbiage, you'd go, they're all reading off the same script, right? So I'm either listening to their consistency or, consistency that's unexplained, or are they telling me different stories? And if they're telling me different stories, I know intuitively one of them, I know intuitively they both can't be right. They could be telling me 2 stories, 1 story each, that are both false, but I know they both can't be right, right? So So it's just, you just know if you're having a conversation with someone and you're trying to convince them of something else, and we're talking about the level of worldview, you're looking for inconsistencies in their arguments. Francis Schaeffer was a master at this. If you've never read the book, The God Who Is There, I highly recommend it. It is very readable. Ignore the fact that he wore knickers. He stuck his pants into his socks. I mean, that was just weird. I don't know why he did that. But in The God Who Is There, he just demonstrates how he had the ability to push somebody back into their worldview and help them see inconsistencies. So, coming back then to any other questions before I, yes? Islam. Well, it's not consistent with reality because not correspondent to reality because Islam and Christianity cannot both be true. That's a good question. So, are there comparisons? Yes, such as? Let's talk about the comparisons. For instance, between, so they're monotheistic, right? Yeah, they can trace lineage back to Abraham, as can, of course, Judaism. Do they have holy books? Mm-hmm. Do they have beliefs about afterlife? Mm-hmm. That there is one, right? But Allah and Yahweh cannot be the same person. They're not the same character. So, to be frank and honest, they both could be wrong. I could be wrong about Christianity. I have staked my life on that. It is not, by the way. So don't worry, I'm not deconstructing in front of you. I'm not that guy. But I understand that they both can't be right. Any other questions? Because we're going to explore that idea here in more detail. Yes?
What about the inconsistencies between, back to Islam,
Mm-hmm.
how would, in your three-step, the Quran and their other holy books?
I couldn't speak to that. I'm sorry. I'm not an expert enough on that. I would guess there's probably reasonable explanations for inconsistencies that wouldn't demolish Islam on the level of consistency or inconsistency. It's the correspondence piece, because remember that's the hardest part. Consistency is kind of easy. It's not as easy as the comprehensive bit, but to get your story straight, most organized religions are going to do that.
Yeah.
Internally.
Is if you read their books, it's
Mm-hmm.
consistent with the Quran.
I have no doubt, but I can't speak to that. I'm sorry. Yeah. Any other questions that I can dodge? All right. So we're gonna do a brief lesson even before we get to the 9 fundamental questions. I know the pragmatists among you are like, just give them to us already. We can be out of here. You can't stop me. We're gonna have a brief conversation on the laws of logic, and I want you to understand that these are great friends to Christianity. So the laws of logic basically kind of codified, if you will, by the Greek philosopher Aristotle. They are not invented. They are discovered. It's like math. Who made math? If your answer is God, you're right. Nobody created math. Math is discovered. Logic is something that is discovered. It is not made. Later on in the Middle Ages, Thomas Aquinas kind of baptized the ideas of Aristotle and used them for Christianity's purposes. Augustine baptize the ideas of Plato and use them for the purposes of Christianity. And I understand that I have brothers and sisters that think that's a horrible pagan idea. Okay. I don't have time to debate that today. But I do want to talk to you about the laws of logic. There are 3 of them. And these 3 laws of logic govern how you think and how I think. Now, if you don't like that statement, as I had at least one student verbally point this out to me one time, if you don't like that and you think, well, I'm not going to be pigeonholed and corralled into a certain way of thinking, Andy, I'm a free thinker, you can't do that to me. I'm going to tell you right now, if you try to argue against the laws of logic, do you know what you have to use? The laws of logic. You can't escape them. And if you're thinking, oh no, this is good. Here's why. Let me give them to you. There's 3 of them. And they're really short. The titles are really short. But these are the 3 you need to know. Number 1, the law of non-contradiction. The law of non-contradiction. The law of non-contradiction simply says this: something cannot both be and not be at the same time and in the same way. Right? Something cannot both be and not be at the same time and in the same way. So if I write a simple 3-word objective truth claim, God is real, right? It's a complete sentence. God is real. Again, for those of you students who want more, this is a long day for everybody. I'm going to teach you how to defend the existence of God outside of your Bibles. Tonight, we're going to do that. And if we have time, if the grown-ups want to know what that is, I'm happy to tell you here too. So God is real. So that is a complete sentence, right? It is an objective truth claim. What makes it an objective truth claim? Do you know? No. 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 It's objectivity is not at all dependent on our belief or knowledge. For instance, 2 + 2 is 4 is true whether or not you can count past 1. Right? Math is actually beautiful in this way because there's actual proofs. It's great. I wish I understood mathematics more than I do, but I'm a man of letters, not numbers. So it is objective because it is either true or false, and it cannot be both at the same time. So if I wrote God is real, which I also believe that, Mel, I'm glad to hear you affirm that. So if I write God is real over here, and over here I write God is not real, so I simply add a not, is that an objective truth claim? Yes, it is. It's just stated in the negative. But I have complete polar opposites. God is real, God is not real. I was getting at this a little bit from Colossians today. You were dead, and God made you alive. And I tried to stress the point, outside of the Princess Bride, you can't be mostly dead, right? So you look at that statement, the law of non-contradiction says they both can't be true. It's impossible. So why is this a friend to Christianity? Well, it's a friend to Christianity because many of us have had that conversation with someone that comes to an impasse because we've come down to a fundamental issue of belief. The reality of God is going to be part of the fundamentals that we're going to look at, these 9 questions, right? And some of us have had conversations with people where it's not just nuanced issues of religion or theology, which are important. We can have internal conversations. But we come down to a fundamental issue, and it wouldn't surprise me if somebody, I know I have done it in the past, in order to kind of save face, which is not a terrible thing, we walk away from a conversation by saying something like, what is true for you is not necessarily nonsense. Truth is truth, right? The law of non-contradiction demonstrates that. Something cannot both be and not be at the same time in the same way. Now, it is a friend to Christianity because that means it is logically defensible. You can defend it. But you need to know, complete disclosure to you, it cuts both ways. There's actually a logical argument, there's at least one, and it's logically sound, one argument against the existence of God. And you may not be able to walk through the deductive argument point by point, but you all know it. It's called the logical problem of evil. Have you ever heard of that before? But you've heard of this. If God is so good, why do bad things happen to good people? That's it, in a nutshell. And do you know how old that argument is? That predates Christianity by 300 years. Developed by the founder of Epicureanism, Epicurus himself. It's one of Paul's sparring partners at the Areopagus in Acts 17, by the way. The Epicurean philosophers, along with the Stoics. So it does cut both ways. But God has given us logic and reason as a gift that we can use. And I do know I have brothers and sisters that struggle with that idea. I've spoken in churches, I've given similar talks, and I've had people come up to me and say, Andy, we love what you're doing, but your problem is, and you can hear the shoe dropping when they say something like that, but the problem is you use man's logic, not God's logic. What's the difference? Logic is logic. John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and many of you know this. What is the Greek word for word? Logos. What word do we get from logos? Logic. Yeah. It makes sense. It's the unifying principle. So, first issue, when we're talking about correspondence, we have to understand that ideas cannot both be and not be at the same time and in the same way. So in the case of God is real or God is not real, both of those are objective truth claims. They both can be argued logically, but they both can't be right. So it's our job to ask, how do we know that God is real? And there's actually really good arguments for that, that way outnumber the arguments against the existence of God. And I'm being honest with you. I'm not just talking to the home team. I'm being honest with you about that. Number two, law of logic number two. It's called the law of identity. Something is what it is, and it is not something else. So, the guest speaker for this weekend at Grace Baptist Church is identical to Andy Giesman. Andy Giesman is identical to the speaker at Grace Baptist Church for this weekend. Are any of you twins? Does anybody have an identical twin? Do you have an identical twin? You're not truly identical. No, because you're not the... I was actually thinking that, but I didn't want to embarrass you, Bob. But you are identical twins. Yeah, right. And so do you really look alike and sound alike? And
Yes, I mean,
yeah. Like if your brother, right?
Yeah.
And so if your brother were here, would I have a hard time telling you apart if you're dressed the same? And I might. Yeah. I taught an ethics class a couple years ago. I don't know why the school did this to me. I had a set of twins, sisters in that class. I could not tell them apart at all. Same hairstyle, they sounded the same. For all I know, they swapped identities all semester long. They were really nice to me, but for all I know, they're like, one lab accident away from becoming supervillains. I don't know. I couldn't tell them apart. But you are not truly identical to your brother, are you? Because that would mean that you are he and he is you. All right. Well, so it's just, it's the language we use, but we all know intuitively in that case it's not the same person. But if I were to write another simple 3-word sentence that is an objective truth claim, Jesus is God. That is an objective truth claim, is it not? because I'm making a statement about reality that is either true or false, not somewhere in between. And in this case, it is dealing with the issue of identity. So, does Jesus identify as God? Yes. Right? So, he cannot both be God and not God at the same time. Right? My joke earlier, to give you another example that's actually an important piece of Christian theism, but not something we talk about in church very often. I told you I had my professor in grad school that wouldn't say it's a no-brainer. He'd say it's a no-minder. And you're thinking, oh, what a nerd. Well, yes, he is, and I am too. But that's actually an important thing. Is your brain your mind? No. Is your brain, is there a correlation between your brain and your mind? Yes. My father-in-law, who is a stroke patient, has a diminished ability for cognition, for thinking right now, because there's a correlation between his brain and mind. But here's a little maxim in philosophy. Correlation does not equal causation or identity. Correlation does not equal causation or identity. So if you put a bunch of diodes on my head and ask me to think about red things, and I think about apples, Magnum PI's Ferrari. Actually, no, that was Robin Masters' Ferrari that he just drove. You're welcome, Gen Xers. That was for you, too. Apples, Barnes, Ferraris. Are different parts of my brain going to light up? Yep. And you're going to see that on the EEG, electroencephalogram. Does that mean my brain is thinking of those things, or there's just a correlation between my brain and those things? Because all I got to do is find one difference between brain and mind, and that eliminates what? Identity. It's not the same thing. That's all you got to do, one thing. And that's actually, that is an important conversation within Christian theism and philosophy of mind. But we have to ask questions of identity. And then the third one is related to non-contradiction. It's going to sound very similar, but there is a little bit of a difference, and that is called the law of the excluded middle. So the law of the excluded middle is very much related to the law of non-contradiction. Something cannot both be and not be at the same time in the same way, nor can it, according to the law of the excluded middle, be somewhere in between. Right? God cannot kind of exist and kind of not exist. It's like in this netherworld in between. It is one or the other and not somewhere in between. So the three laws of logic are going to govern how we think about the piece of correspondence, which is, again, going to be the most important. Because you can find plenty of worldviews that are consistent and comprehensive, but there is no way Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, the polytheism of the Greeks, the Romans, the Babylonians, or the weird monotheism of the Persians, there's no way all of those can be true at the same time. It's impossible. Are there overlaps and similarities? Yes, of course. But there's no way they can all be true at the same time. All right. So let me give you now the 9 pieces of the 9 fundamental questions. And again, this is not etched in stone. If you come across a resource, if you're ever reading in the area of apologetics or something, you come across a resource that says a different number, it is really okay. But it's kind of the gist of things. And there is a bit of an order. Number 1 needs to be number 1. Number 2 really should be number 2, but then after that, it doesn't really matter all that much. Okay? So here is primary question number 1, fundamental question number 1. What is the basic makeup of prime reality? So question number 1, fundamental question number 1, what is the basic makeup of prime reality? Now, what do you think we're getting at with that question? Okay, so when we talk about prime reality, what do you think that means? Yes, that's part of it. Why do we exist? But that's lower down on the outline. We got to get closer to the top. So we're talking big, fat, bolded Roman numeral 1. There is a yes. We are assuming there is a reality. Okay. We were talking about the Matrix earlier. Like if you've seen the Matrix so many times and you think that this is a computer simulated program, I can't help you. I don't know what to tell you. So the basic makeup of prime reality. Okay, let me help you, and I'm trying to tease it along because I want you to come along with me. Yes, we're asking what is real. This is a question of what is called, and I know I'm giving you a lot of terms today, but I'm okay with that because we need to be a good thinking people. This is a question of ontology. Ontological questions ask primarily who or what. Okay? So if we're asking the question ontologically, what is the basic makeup of prime reality? We have a choice. It is either what or who. Okay. So, as good Baptists attending a seminar on a Sunday afternoon, are we going to go with the basic assumption of what or who? Who. Okay? So this is where we have to start, because if your answer is, well, it can't be a who, it's a what, and there are worldviews that do that, like at the core, something like Darwinian evolution. There's no who, it's a what. Friedrich Nietzsche, the power is the center of all things, is not a who, it's a what. Marxism, it's not a who, it's a what. Right? So if the basic assumption is what, then the answers to the questions that follow, if they're going to be consistent, have to look a certain way. Are you following? I know you haven't seen the questions yet, but just take my word for it in the fact that I'm wearing a tie and a vest, and I look like I know what I'm talking about. Okay? That's a joke. Sorry, it was a bad one. I was trying. So we're beginning with the basic question, who? Right? So this is, okay, there is a who that is outside, above, and not bound by the physical universe. So the basic makeup of prime reality is centered in personhood, not thingness. Now, would a Muslim answer that same primary question the same way? Yes. Right? So this is part of the limitations of what we would call general revelation or natural theology. That's what we're dealing with. But unlike the view I was given in Bible college, it's way more important than I was led to believe. Right? So there are some things. So then from that, if that's the primary question, then from that stems like, well, then who is this who? Can I know? Have they told me who they are? The ancient Greeks, even in their polytheistic view, you have Zeus, Apollo, and all that kind of stuff, Athena, Poseidon. So they're answering the primary question with who as well. But if you ask them, and how do you know? Have they told you? No. There's no revelation. Okay? So that's number one. And it's going to be totally common sense. You're going to say, okay, I understand why that's number one, because the rest have to follow. Number two. And I think number two should be number two. I mean, it's not a big deal, but it kind of makes sense logically. So number two is the question, what is the basic makeup of external reality? All right, so the first question, we're talking about prime reality. That is a question of ontology, which asks who or what questions. It's asking questions of identity. So the Christian worldview has got to begin with who, as does the sacred text of Christianity. In the beginning, God, right? Okay. Which is consistent all the way out through the Bible, and it is a reasonable worldview to have because it is defensible, logically. Then we come to number two. Well, what is the basic makeup of external reality? So, again, we're assuming there is a reality, right? There is a reality, but now we're asking, okay, is this reality cosmos? Is it ordered? Or is it chaos? Is it disordered? Now, if the answer to your first question is not who, it's just what, well, I don't need a who because I have Big Bang cosmology or whatever, right? Everything just happened to line up right, got struck by lightning, and presto, there's life. And that's really a stretch. But you're eliminating who from the first primary question. You come to the second fundamental questions, and you're asking, okay, is there order or disorder? If your answer is order, but there's no who, how do what's order anything? They don't get organized, right? This is why I don't fear scenarios like Planet of the Apes. I really don't. I really don't think the monkeys are going to get that organized. I don't think they can. They don't do it. Nor do I fear Terminator scenarios and the rise of machines. If this table develops a consciousness right now, run. Okay, and on the way out, you can be like, Geisman, I told you it was possible. That you're right. Okay, but otherwise, who-ness has consciousness and makes decisions. What-ness does not. Right? So, first primary fundamental question, what is the basic makeup of prime reality? Well, if it's who, and then we come to number two, what is the basic makeup of external reality? Well, I think it is orderly, cosmos. That makes sense. Or the other option is chaos. To use another Greek word, yes.
I have studied science a lot. There's chaos, but there's no such thing as chaos. If you look at the universe, it's all orderly. So
I agree.
You can see like a minimal of chaos, but there's really order in chaos. You know, that's the chaos theory. Do you know what I mean? Like, like, you know, this room could be scattered and there could be junk all over the place. However, there's still order.
Yeah.
Chaos.
I appreciate that. So I worked for a guy. He has a PhD in theology. He's an adjunct professor where I teach as well. Good brother. He owns a lawn care business, and we would go around and around and around. I worked for him for a season. We'd go around and around and around because we're like cutting grass, and he was like, it's called D&D lawn care, detailed and dependable. And I mean, every blade of grass was accounted for when we do this stuff. And I would make jokes about, we're returning cosmos to the order, to the disorder, of the fallen leaves and all that. And he was right, because, and this is just what two nerds talk about when they're out raking leaves. He said, no, there's actual order in the overgrown yard and the leaves falling. So you're right. In some sense, there is no such thing as disorder, which would then say, well, how do things get ordered? Because we know that order doesn't arise out of disorder. That just doesn't make sense. The other way is possible. Never has a tornado ripped through a junkyard and at the end of it has a viable 747. Never. It's never happened. So again, you're looking at, is there order or not? All right, so if there's a who, well then it makes sense that there's order, okay? All right, now, the last seven, there is no true order that you have to put these in, but I'm going to give it to you in the order that I have. Number 3, what is a human person? Now, debates have been raging for a long time as to what a definition of humanness is. When does it start? When does it end? And do not let something like this intimidate you, because you will find scientists who know a whole lot more about science than most people, than I do, at least in the room. I appreciate science, but I'm not a science guy. Neither is Bill Nye, for that matter. But anyway, but you will be told, well, science answers that question. It does not. It does not. This is one of the conversations I have with my students. And this is along the lines of, why in the world do I have to take a philosophy class when I'm here studying in the medical sciences? Where I teach, they're actually really known for things like their nursing program, their OT, PT programs. We have a lot of people there studying in the sciences to go on to medical school. And at this school, if you can make it in these programs, you're set, because they do a really good job. So I will ask my students, and I'll pose this question to you, in terms of what is a human person. Being an expert in any of the medical sciences, you're going to be able to recognize a human body, right? At least hope so. You're not guessing. Right? You're going to know that. You're also going to know when it's not working right or broken, and you're going to be trained in the skills and technologies on how to fix it, right? All those things are true. Can being an expert, or does being an expert in the medical sciences, tell you what a human person is? Nope. And so my students, sometimes, they often don't push back on this, because they go, oh yeah, I see what you're getting at, Andy. But sometimes they'll do is, okay, let's go down to the cadaver lab at the university, a place I never really want to visit, honestly, because the time I walk in there, the gas bubble's going to hit just right, and that thing's going to sit up and burp in my face. It's probably never happened. Does it really? Okay. But just the knowledge that weird things happen, right? So if we go in there, we pull out the slab. Okay, so what's the difference between me and this body? Well, you're alive. Okay, well, there's plenty of things that are alive that aren't human persons, like, say, trees, blades of grass. They're not human persons, are they? Nope. Okay. Well, one time I had a student say, well, you're moving, and that thing is not. Well, again, I'm no science major, but I know as long as there's matter, there's movement. At the atomic level, of course there is, right? So what else you got? And it turns out nothing, right? But if there is a who has ordered creation, then maybe the issue of humanness is beyond, like, highly functioning machine or evolved animal, because if we're just highly functioning machines, technically my little Hyundai Elantra is a highly functioning machine. It works. But if it continues to break down, which it's not going to, Lord willing, because it's relatively new for me, it's not the Mazda 3 I've driven out here multiple times. I went to be with Jesus. But if the car breaks down over and over and over again, what do I do with it? I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to junk it. I'm going to recycle it. Why don't we do that with people? We don't do that with people, because they have some kind of intrinsic value, which a Christian worldview talks about. So in our small group last night, we were talking about that a little bit, and we talked about famous scientist. Sorry, just my brain stopped working here for a second. Stephen Hawking, right? Cosmologist Stephen Hawking. There's nothing about Stephen Hawking's worldview that would keep Stephen Hawking alive. Christianity does that, right? So, what is a human person? Number 4, how do I know anything at all? How do I know anything at all? I once stepped into the classroom that I often teach in at the university, and it's in organic chemistry land. So, but it's a really nice classroom. And a couple years ago, I walked in, And there's often notes and stuff left on the lectern, and I don't really pay attention to it. I just shove them out of the way, get my computer plugged in, and I get going with them, I think. But my eyes happened to fall on the opening paragraph, and it was clearly handouts that were used in what I assume was a biology 101 class, kind of like first day kind of thing. And the reason I was interested is because on the very top of the paper, it said, the discipline of biology explains every facet of human existence. Does it? Interesting. I didn't know that. And it was thick. I mean, I don't know how they got through this thing in one class. That would be a miracle, which that's another thing biology doesn't explain. But so I started looking through it, and I got all the way to the end, and I found what I was looking for. And there was a little subcategory. It said human consciousness. Oh, this will be good. And it said, human consciousness can be explained as an eruptive process of evolution. An eruptive process of evolution. What does that even mean? What they're claiming in that book, so this is not, I'm not slamming evolutionism. I'm not an evolutionist, but this is a different issue altogether. What that book is claiming, that somehow a material thing developed an immaterial thing. Consciousness is immaterial. You can't go down to Walmart and buy a pound of consciousness thinly sliced. It's impossible. It's an immaterial thing. There's no explanation for that. Yes, sir?
External forces cause change.
Sure. But there's only one external force that can make something immaterial, which would be God. Material things never make immaterial things. Another example would be DNA, right? So DNA, really fascinating that we even, and I say we, like I know what I'm talking about, like we even understand what DNA is, radical discovery, 20th century discovery. And we know that DNA is the building blocks for our bodies. Well, what does DNA possess? Information. Is information material or immaterial? How did it get there? Because the DNA made it? Nope. Even if you had all the right pieces randomly come together for a viable strand of DNA, gets struck by lightning, it's not going to produce any information. Computers possess information. Does a computer create information? No. It's a who, not a what. Right? Good. Okay. Number 5, and this is a big one right now. Who or what is behind human history? Or when we ask what in the world is going on, who or what is behind human history? So you take complete atheists like Friedrich Nietzsche or Karl Marx. They're certainly not going to say, well, God is behind human history and is orchestrating everything. In the case of Nietzsche, you're going to have power. In the case of Marx, you're going to have class warfare that really mean nothing and are going nowhere. Unlike Daniel in Daniel 1, verse 2, where he says, and the Lord handed Jehoiakim into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. It's kind of the thing we skip over because they're like, let's get to the big dream already. But there's this big worldview section in Daniel chapter 1 where he's saying this is part of a plan. And if there's a plan, maybe I can be a part of it too. Number 6, what happens at death? So there's a couple different ways to answer that question. One of them is nothing, right? For instance, do you ever wonder why, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, the famous Paul at the University of Athens, as I like to call it, the Areopagus, in Acts chapter 17. He's in the agora, he's in the marketplace, and according to Luke, he's talking about the good news of the resurrection of Jesus. And then Luke says a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers begin to argue with him because they have a real problem with what he's saying. Do you know why the Epicureans and Stoics have such a problem? because they have no concept of a resurrection. For Epicureanism, Epicureans believe that all the good is merely in pleasure, and the only way you can experience pleasure is with the five senses. So when you're dead, you're no longer sensate. So that's it. Lights out. There's nothing. And the Stoics were a little more agnostic. They didn't really talk about an afterlife. That just not something they were concerned with. But neither one of them had a concept of life after death. So your answer could be nothing, could be something. That something could be, as we would understand it, eternal reward or eternal punishment, or there's other somethings besides that, like the whole cyclical, idea of reincarnation or whatever. Let me give you an example of an inconsistent worldview that I saw. Right, so this was glaringly obvious. I pastored in the inner city in Scranton for quite a few years. I did a lot of funerals. I did more funerals than weddings, and a lot of the people who died, most of the people for whom I provided services for their funeral were younger than me. Most of them. And I stopped pastoring officially 8 years ago, and I just turned 50 in January, so you can do the math. I was not really an old man, and most of the people who were dying were younger than me, dying horrible deaths. We had 2 murder victims from our youth group. One of those murders is still unsolved. People, suicides, overdoses, totally preventable diseases, that kind of stuff. So when an older person, like an older senior saint, died of natural causes, it was kind of a relief, actually. And we had this lady pass away. She didn't really go to our church. She was a bit of a shut-in, but her family did, and we knew her well. I was in her hospital room, and she took her last breath, things pastors do. And she had given specific instructions that she did not want a funeral. She wanted a send-off party. Have you ever had that request? You have? Okay. And I thought, all right, that's weird, but okay. That's cool. I can do that. So a little bit of time passed. Her daughter rented this community fire hall thing out in the country where they lived, and we showed up, and I thought, what is going to happen? Mercifully, it's not like there was an open casket or something. That would have been super weird. There were no remains at all at the thing, but it was party hats and cake and all that kind of stuff. So it was literally a party. And I'm doing my job. I'm greeting people coming in the door. And this guy comes in, this young man, and he tells me that he is her great nephew, but he thought more of her as like a grandmother. And it was like he was angling for something, like he wanted her comic book collection. I don't know. But in the course of that conversation, he decided to tell me, well, I'm an atheist, he said to me. And I thought, all right, well, that's kind of a weird time to tell me that, okay, good for you. I don't know really what you want me to say. I'm thinking, because there's a time and place to have that conversation, and that's neither, right? Okay, thank you for your honesty. You're an atheist. Have some cake. So after a while, we did have an official time where I was asked to say a few words, and we opened it up to let people share memories. And those of you who've been to funerals know that that's not always something that you want to do, because people will say really stupid things at times like that. Because death not only brings out the good, but it brings out the worst in people sometimes. But we had no worries. There was no dirty laundry that was going to be aired at this thing. So people are standing up and they're sharing nice stories, reminiscences and things, and this dude stands up. I thought, buckle up, here we go. So he's telling some stories about her, and they're all appropriate, and then he starts talking about her wonderful afterlife that she's now enjoying. Now, I just smile, nod, do my thing, but in my mind I'm going, okay, time out, dude. Like hashtag philosopher props, because that's radically inconsistent. if there's no God, where do you get an afterlife? Now, is it possible? Yeah, but it's not really logical. It's not really sensical. And again, maybe he was just trying to be nice. I don't know. But just from the words, it was radically inconsistent. And then there's three more, and these have to do with ethics. Number 7, how do I know the difference between right and wrong? Notice the wording of that question. It's not, is there a right and wrong? How do I know the difference between right and wrong? I argue, I hold the position that everybody on the planet knows the difference between right and wrong. Now, their moral compass and your moral compass, the needle may not point in the same direction. But everybody has a sense of right and wrong. How do we know that? Backing up the questions, if we go all the way back to the beginning, what is the basic makeup of primarily? And we do not begin with the basic assumption of who, but with what. Okay. Then I have basically at my disposal to explain reality, my Bible has been reduced to the periodic table of elements. There's no story. There's no meta-narrative. There's no redemption. We're not going anywhere. And I look at the periodic table of elements, where in the world do I get right or wrong or good or evil? I mean, is there any intrinsic value on that chart between, say, gold and carbon? Nope. Yet there's one of them that you need to survive, and it's not gold. Just carbon. We're all carbon bags at the end of the day. Just dirt bags, right? That's basically what carbon is, just dirt. There's nothing on there that explains it. This, if I can camp here for a second, this is among the most important issues facing the mission of the church today. Here's what I mean. It is very difficult for me to explain to my students that there are objective moral duties and values. Like, something is objectively wrong whether or not you believe it or know it. Now, there are some obvious ones that we could talk about. Things like, is it ever right to torture babies? No. Can you come up with any scenario where it's a good thing to do? Nope. Can't do it. So it's objectively wrong. Like that one's easy. Okay. And then I'll ask my students the same question I asked about questions of objectivity when I said God is real, right? So this is a question of objectivity because it's either wrong or it's not, right? But I'll ask them, why is that objective? And they will come back to me and they will say, well, it's objective because you believe it or because I believe it. No, that has nothing to do with your belief. It is objectively, in this case, wrong. It is objectively wrong. They have a very, very difficult time. The average college student has a very difficult time accepting the reality of objective morals, because that means someone could be right, then conversely someone could be wrong. I see this over and over and over again in the papers that they write for my ethics class. It's almost confessional for them, and they have to do it. They have to say, well, we all know that there's no one right system of morality or ethics. And I tell them, there is no way on God's green earth any of you would dare live consistently in that worldview. There is no way. Because their idea is that right and wrong is completely up to the individual. It's called ethical egoism is actually the title for that, the term for that. And that's not an off-the-wall weirdo thing. That is the idea of the age. That's normal. Have you ever seen a Disney film? Okay, that's the moral of most Disney films. The morality is totally up to you. Actually, reality is totally up to you. If you just believe deep down in your heart that's the way things are going to be. No, it's not. You can be anything you want. No, you can't. Sorry. Now, is there some altruism there? I want to try to be an astronaut. Okay, good. Just because you want to be, I mean, if you don't want to be, probably not going to become one, right? That's kind of common sense. It's like, do you have to have a good attitude in order to summit Mount Everest? Well, no, but going to Tibet with a poopy diaper, probably not going to help you. It's probably going to get you killed, actually, right? So they have this idea that morality is totally up to the individual, that there is no right or wrong, ultimately, objectively, that is up to the individual. Think of the gospel implications for that. I want you to tell me, what do you think are implications for that, for the mission of the church? If there's a complete generation, and it's nearly ubiquitous, it's nearly complete, and I'm not just picking on college students, like everybody thinks this way, okay? And I even hold that I wonder how many people in church, like Bible-believing churches, who can answer the right questions are completely inconsistent with their worldview when it comes to this issue. Oh, yes, but Jesus is God, died for my sins, but I get to master my own ship. Okay? So what are the implications for the mission of the church then, if that is the idea du jour in our culture? We have no need of a Savior because we have nothing that we need to be saved from. And if you don't need anything to be saved from, why would you want to have any participation in something to be saved to? You want me to give up my rights, my autonomy, my identity, to become an automaton Christian like the rest of you when I have all this? Well, if they don't see that there's something to be rescued from, why in the world would they want that? And ladies and gentlemen, I do not have a silver bullet way to fix that. I really don't. Would you indulge me to tell you about the one thing that helps? And I never saw it coming. Like, I was as shocked as maybe you would be. How many of you have spent any time, either casually, maybe you lost a bet, I don't know, or in college reading Friedrich Nietzsche? Anybody read Friedrich Nietzsche? Yeah, how much? Just enough to be like, wow, that's a train wreck. Okay, right? I've read a lot, and I've studied it because his worldview actually drives a lot of what's going on. And if you want to know more about that, you can just ask me, and we can talk later. But I've read that, and I have to cover Nietzsche in my classes. I do a little bit in my intro class, and I really do it in my ethics class. But I don't teach it like a crotchety old fundamentalist, right? A crotchety old fundamentalist would approach it, well, this is stupid, but I got to tell you what it is anyway. I don't do that. I try to approach it as objectively as possible. I don't make it look like I'm on the Nietzsche bus, because I'm not. But I don't come at it like, well, this is just idiotic, but I'm going to have to tell you. So I walked through Nietzsche's ethical worldview, which would take me longer than I have to explain to you, but suffice it to say, there's a book that's called Beyond Good and Evil, wherein he wants to flip the idea of good and evil on its head. So he says that the classical view, or the traditional view, is that the good are the noble, often the underdog that are serving those who are beneath them or want to help them, like that chivalrous idea, which this sounds stupid to me at face value, but you know, that chivalrous idea of laying your coat down over the puddle for the lady to walk across. You know, that's just dumb. Go around it. But that kind of thing, right? He'd say, no, that's actually wicked, and the powerful need to act powerfully. Okay, case in point, 1977, Star Wars hits the screen. Who are the good guys? The Jedi. Well, they're bringing balance to the Force, so that's a whole nother question. But what group of people are the good guys? The rebels. Why? Right. They're standing up to the empire, and that's why they're the good guys. So this is going to make some of you uncomfortable. I'm an imperial sympathizer. Because, and you're like, what? He's not ever coming back here. Because it's never explained to us why they're actually the good guys. Okay, so the empire blows up Alderaan. They should not have done that. Granted, I get it. But think about later on, I'm a Star Wars fanboy, but I hate most of the movies. It's just weird. I just love the concept. Anyway. But one of the movies I really enjoyed was Rogue One. I really enjoyed that. I thought that was good storytelling. But you see you see the evil nature even in the Empire, or in the Rebel Alliance. Like, they murder a person. Now, you could argue, well, it was to protect a secret. Yeah, but it's still murder. You're compromised, right? So Nietzsche would have had a field day with Star Wars, but because we're used to that idea, yeah, we're standing up to the man in this case. He basically said, no, the powerful need to be set loose. Like wolves need to feed on sheep. There's nothing tastier than lamb. We need to feed on them, turn them loose. So the end of that semester, during that semester, this is 4 or 5 years ago now, there are 3 atrocities that happened in pretty quick succession in this country. First of all was the shooting at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas, and that just went away. What happened? Weird, right? But we're all in rapt attention, like watching that. And then while we're just kind of calming down from that, then there's a guy who ran down the cyclists with the rented Home Depot truck in Manhattan. And then there was the shooting outside of Austin, Texas at the church. So boom, 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 3 in a row. So at the end of the semester, and we're doing Nietzsche at the end, I put up pictures of each of the 3 atrocities with the names of the alleged perpetrator beneath them. And I said, all right, now let's assume that we could get these 3 men here and we could dispense with the language of alleged, and they told you straight up, I did this. So there's no question who committed these acts. Are they wrong? And my students are looking at me like, some of you are looking at me like, why are you asking us? Is there a trick? And there was. I said, are these guys wrong? And they're like, yes. And then my response when they answer like that is, are you asking me or telling me? Oh, we're telling you. Okay. Why? Are you sure? Yeah, sure. Okay. Why? In the room full of 19 and 20-year-olds that for 3 months now has been telling me that there is no such thing as objective moral duties and values, or to deal with the question, how do I know the difference between right and wrong, suddenly are morally indignant that evil has been perpetrated upon the innocents. And I simply ask them one question: why? And you know what their answers are? Terrible. They give me all the subjective nonsense that they've been trying to peddle all semester long, and it is a turkey shoot. There are planes falling from the sky with smoke trailing from their tails as I shoot down all of their things that they're saying, and they get angry with me. This is great. This is great. They're angry with me, and I'm waiting, and it doesn't always work out quite this well, but often it does. And I'm waiting for one kid to ask me a question. And usually they do, and they say, Andy, don't you think this is wrong? Of course I do. But see, the difference between you and I is that I have an objective reason. You don't. What I don't tell them, it's because the law is written on their hearts, Romans 2. So they know. They know that this is wrong. But a worldview that doesn't begin with who could never come to that conclusion logically. Right? You see that? Okay. And then I'm going to give you just these last two, and then I'm going to open up for questions, but I'm starting to run out of gas in my voice. So if we end a little early, is that? No? Okay. You're going to be here until the kids come back at 6, so buckle up. No, I'm kidding. All right, so number 8 is who is a good person. When I taught my first ethics class at the University of Scranton, I think it was 2016, fall of 2016, and I thought, ooh, I have a good activity that'll get the kids started, like conversing in the first day of class, because this is an ethical question, who's a good person? I said, okay, everybody get out a piece of paper, draw a line down the center so you have 2 columns. At the top of one column, I want you to write the name Hillary Clinton. At the top of the other column, I want you to write the name Donald Trump. Tell me who is a good person or not. Go. I will never do that again. The outcome of that conversation was well above my pay grade. I am not doing that again. But they had some interesting opinions about that kind of stuff. And then number 9, who is well off? Who's truly wealthy? Who's rich? Right? Okay. Questions that you may have. Yes?
So did you eventually, with your students, when you had those 3 pictures, did you eventually reveal to them the hypocrisy of what they had been writing?
Oh, yeah, I showed them that it was radically inconsistent and they couldn't defensibly, logically tell me why it's wrong. I did show them that.
And did they see?
Yeah, the looks on their faces, like that particular class, I had a really good relationship. A little bit of background. That particular group of students was very unique because almost everyone in that room had me before as a professor, and the students that did not got dragged in by their friends. And there are actually a group of students in there that was their 4th class with me, and that wasn't an accident. They had me for their 2 theology classes, which I don't teach theology any longer, and then they chose to take me for their 2nd philosophy class. So I had a unique relationship and trust with them. I didn't have to work all semester to build. But when we got to that point, the looks on their faces, because they knew their worldview had just completely fallen apart. And there's no putting it back together the way they want it, if they're going to be intellectually honest. And there's actually a few kids that they're willing to do that. Yeah. Yes?
Question about death and afterlife.
Yes? Where is it in order? Yeah, that's... You did. That's number 6. Yep. Yeah, what happens at death is number 6. Yep. Yes.
Going back to number 7, I'm not quite sure how to pose this question, but how does that interact with the verse about him that knows to do good and does it not? The corollary that he doesn't know to do good, doesn't do it.
What's the reference? So, well, that would be, that's addressed to Christians, right? I think I see the core of the question. So let me come at it from a different angle, and you tell me if this is what you're thinking, because if it's not, correct me. But it's the idea: should we expect non-Christians to act correctly when it comes to right and wrong? Is that kind of what you're saying? Yeah. Okay. There is somewhat of a subjective nature to it, somewhat. But there are core issues that are not subjective at all, right? And I think the world operates on the subjective nature of truth and morality. Basically, are there bad actors? Yes. Are there complete moral failures? Yes. But basic human dignity, that there is a yes and no, there are moral duties and values. I think the world acts on that, and I think we can expect them. Like, we expect someone who isn't a Christian to actually be able to know the truth and to tell it, and to know the difference between a truth and a lie. It doesn't take a Christian to know that. Just like does the jihadist who's making improvised explosive devices, is it possible for that jihadist to really honestly love his mother? Yeah. But are Christians held to a standard that is high? Yes. And I don't think that's inconsistent. Mel?
I was going to ask, I think, therefore I am. Or is it I am?
No, that's I think, therefore I am. Yep. But do you want me to expound on René Descartes? Because he's boring. You don't want me to do that. He's all French and boring. I'm just kidding. But he is French.